Hello and welcome to another Register Kettle, your chance to hear about the news from the people that write it at the coalface, as it were. Now, today we're taking a bite out of Apple because it's been a busy week for the company. We had their earnings yesterday. The government is wrapping up its trial, in which Apple is its antitrust trial, in which Apple is a very key player. And there's been a bunch of other news about the company, but let's lead off with the financials. Now, Apple's stock price went up, despite it reporting declining net income, declining revenues. And I wonder why that was. It's a massive share buyback scheme, $110 billion being spent buying its own shares, an activity which used to be illegal until the markets were deregulated in the 80s. Chaps, what do you think? I mean, it was a bumper results field, but the stock price and the share buyback is weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. I mean, you look at all the companies that do these big buybacks, and you think of, like IBM and Oracle and now Google and Apple. It's pure share price engineering, and this benefits the executives, and the employees are thrown under the bus. I mean, how many people could they have paid for for how many years, given the amount of money that they're plowing back into their stock?
Well, Cory Doctorow raised this with the Google share buyback. They spent enough money. They've then fired 12,000 engineers, and they'd spent enough money on one stock buyback program to employ those people for the next 27 years. It's phenomenal amounts of money. I mean, you didn't use the manipulation word there, but it certainly looks like that.
Yeah, I mean, financial engineering. I mean, it's legal, and this is the sad fact that our shareholder structure is only rewarding shareholder value and doesn't take anything else into consideration. And maybe there are some things to be said for, I don't know, employee loyalty or morale or any of these other sort of soft values that make a company function properly.
Yeah. I don't know, Chris, you were going through the figures yesterday, and there was a certain amount of incredulity there. It was just like, what on earth is going on?
Well, at Apple, yeah. Would it be useful to kind of explain, for those who don't know what it means, like what a share buyback means? Like, what is that? What happens there?
Well, basically, the company takes cash out of its reserves, buys its own shares, which raises the value. So stockholders are happy, executives are happy because their salary is tied to the share value, and everyone else gets. I'm trying to think of a polite term for it, but
because it starts to push companies into the certain sort of bracket of where, like, why do people buy IBM shares? Oh, because of the dividends, and it's starting to. You can start to see some of these what used to be big cool it's cool in technology enthusiasts way, big cool. Companies suddenly looking like the old school, starting to look. It's interesting to see the shift. There's a lot of jokes about how is Google the new IBM? But if they're going to start doing things like share buybacks and start handing out dividends, I think it starts to move them into that area. It's quite interesting to see. But they're obviously, it also says a lot about the companies as well involved. It's like, well, what else is there to do? Oh, I guess we got share buybacks. The vision goggles aren't really taking off. Everyone's got a phone. People are disengaging from the internet. What's left to do? Yeah, right. The shareholders, of course, the people who kind of keep this whole thing going.
Don't forget VR.
Don't forget the. Oh yeah, VR. Right. I mean, yeah, that totally.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't hear much about the metaverse anymore, do we? And Apple's goggles don't seem to be going anywhere.
If what was really crazy about the VR stuff is that the pandemic made and broke VR. It made VR in the, well, we're all stuck inside, so we'll have to, let's put some head goggles on and pretend that we're outside. Then suddenly the pandemic is pretty much over, and then everyone just wants to get the heck out of a home. So like, I don't want to sit at home with some goggles on my face. I don't want to sit at work with some goggles on my face. I remember that these devices are going to take at least a couple of years to develop. And so what we're seeing now was kind of what seemed like a good idea in the pandemic. A lot of things we're seeing now probably seemed good during the pandemic. It's all seemed good from the outside of the pandemic. But yeah.
Yeah, the iPhone 15 isn't doing particularly well. The Mac platform was up a bit, which was interesting, but that was about the only bit of good news on the figures. And it cost them 110 billion just to put a nice gloss on it. as you say, I like your point about sort of are these companies the new IBM because they're basically just supporting their shareholder value and not developing anything new.
Yeah, it kind of fuels the whole bubble aspect of it. It kind of fuels
and of course, I mean, there's a big push now. All these companies want to, get subscriptions for these, sort of atomic AI services that are going to, do something for you. And, once you get past things like, document summary for people who don't actually want to read their documents, there's not a lot that's, sort of office workers can get, can't get a lot of benefit out of it. Coders can, get some help. And then there obviously are real AI applications and things like robotics and whatever. But in terms of like productivity, it's just not that useful to have, AI other than being sort of a tertiary player that helps out every so often.
Yeah, I mean, Apple is certainly behind the game when it comes to AI. And there are there are rumors that basically they're talking with Google about putting Gemini onto their platform in all ways. I've got to say, I have an Android phone, having used Gemini on the phone, it is absolutely useless. And I went back to Google Assistant. So,
yeah. I tried the Claude app on iOS the other day, and I put in a picture of the San Francisco City Hall one night that I'd taken. It was lit up with green, and it dutifully told me it was the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Great. I've just stopped there.
Yeah,
that's like not even bothering to look at the geotag information on the picture. Like, it didn't even think to maybe double check that to see if it was in Annapolis, Maryland.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think that a lot of these models aren't really just one singular model. I could be wrong here, but from my experience of using a model hands-on, just having a model downloaded and running inference through it, you need to have it would be a good idea to put a model after and before, so that it can filter the information that goes into the main model. So I think maybe that a lot of these production models have another model at the back, which is basically trained. Does what the main LLM look correct, or does it look like garbled mess, or does it look what is the quality of the output? And then if it's good, it allows it through, and if it's bad, it gives you some generic message like Gemini says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question right now."
Isn't that kind of the idea behind like adversarial AI? Like they're trying to like look at stuff and say whether or not they're convinced or something like that. Isn't there something of a concept in adversarial like that?
It sounds a bit like that. Yeah, it sounds a bit like you have two models competing with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how they train them. They have an adversarial training system where the models sort of go back and forth and they improve each other, and as part of the training process.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to have to see. And also, if Gemini does come to Apple, then I suspect Apple are going to want to be paid for it. Because we found out this week in the antitrust trial that's being brought against Google that Google was paying quite phenomenal sums to get its search engine onto iOS devices. And I mean, we're talking billions here. Chris, I know you were ranting about these figures. Can you fill us in?
I'm sure Tom can talk more about it. But the top line I saw was that Apple contributed $20 billion to Google contributed $20 billion to Apple in 2020. So we're talking a pandemic here, which was something like 17% and a bit of Apple's operating income. So it's to have its search engine as default on Apple's platforms. So just about 20% of Apple's operating income in 2020 came from Google to get its search engine in there.
Yeah.
And I know, Tom, you've been covering parts of this.
I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that trial, because I mean, the judge, from what I understand, was going after both sides pretty hard to try and assess their arguments. But if he ends up deciding against Google in the antitrust trial, and that limits Google's ability to pay Apple, it'll be what's that going to do to Apple's stock to not have all of a sudden that income, and what does that mean that Apple's going to have to do strategically to replace that? And what's Google, that's going to be a big deal if that happens.
Sorry, Brandon.
I was just going to say they can just do some more buybacks or make some more non-specific statements about AI coming soon.
They've got cash in the bank, but sooner or later that's going to run out if they don't come up with with something new.
New, yeah. That isn't the headset, yeah.
Well, I mean, the headset seems to be just going nowhere. You know, I mean, it's
$3,500. I mean, you've got a situation. I mean, you've got Starbucks complaining that people aren't buying coffee anymore. Like, so, I mean, I don't know how many units they expected to sell, but I remember when the iPhone was like $1,000 and everyone was kind of like, who the hell is going to spend $1,000 on a phone? And now you got Apple being like, oh, can you spend $3,500 on a headset for what? I mean, because what, like your eyes aren't good enough to like look at a screen in front of you.
Yeah.
My initial reaction to the 20 billion to Apple was, I don't think Europe is going to let that fly. That they're not going to allow the monopoly search corporation to give 20% of operating income to another multi-billion-dollar company. It just reinforces the idea that big tech is a big club and everyone else is not in it. But on the other hand, I can see perversely Google arguing that Apple's market share in operating systems is pretty small if you think about macOS, and Android is still dominant in mobile. So this is really, in a way, Google propping up a small-time player that just happens to have a lot of revenue. I can see that perversely being argued, but
Apple's argued that before when Microsoft was funding it in the sort of late 90s, early noughties, where Microsoft was actively bankrolling Apple just for antitrust reasons, so it could say, look, there is competition in the market.
Yeah. That definitely happened in the 90s, like when the whole antitrust came up again. Like companies like Intel and Microsoft were just grabbing any kind of like small competitor and stuffing the money. It was kind of like when two siblings are playing and one of them gets hurt. Normally, like the little one, like the younger brother gets hurt, and the older brother's kind of like, shh, don't tell mom, be quiet, it's all under control. I'll give you $10, or like I'll give you my favorite toy or something like that. It was that kind of like reaction. It was kind of like, no, we're best buddies. Everything's fine.
Well, this is it. I mean, Tom, how do you think this trial's going to go? I mean, are we going to see a quick resolution and find against Google?
Usually if it's being decided by a judge, it usually takes a couple of months. But I don't see how the judge sort of lets all this evidence and the things that, about the document destruction by Google just go and go, yeah, Google, nothing wrong, keep going business as usual. I mean, I think there's going to be some kind of sanction. It's the question is just how much and what kind of burden that's going to put on Google's operations.
There is a concept in Silicon Valley called escape velocity, and it's that companies like Apple and Google and Meta, especially Meta and Amazon and Google and Microsoft, have achieved escape velocity in that they make so much money. Well, I mean, Apple's down a bit, but like they continue. Like, I mean, even Cloudflare is up like 20%. Like, I mean, in terms of revenue or something like that. But they have got so much money coming in that any reasonable fine that a government places on them, they will be able to pay off by the time it's all resolved. So let's say that you fine Google $10 billion and it takes another 5 years or so, or up to 10 years to argue that, as we saw with Intel fighting the European punishment. In 10 years' time, $10 billion is nothing to Google. Like, it will pay it off. And so they've achieved what some people call, or some see as, escape velocity, that there is nothing you can do right now. And the only thing left is to break them up. And that, as much as like there is criticism of big tech, I don't know if that will serve. It remains to be seen if that will serve people well. Will YouTube function as well as YouTube does without the enormous Google infrastructure behind it? Will Azure be viable without Microsoft behind it? And same with AWS and Amazon. Although AWS and Amazon is quite an interesting thing, because we used to joke that it was a cloud platform with a gift shop on the side, but it's kind of looking a little bit more and more. It's kind of looking more and more like that.
Well, we're going to have to see if the government has actually got any teeth and if it can actually do anything. But Apple at the moment isn't looking particularly rosy, I think is the phrase that we're looking for. But thanks very much, everyone, for coming in. And we'll be back next week with another kettle. And when the news breaks, we'll be there.